Thank you all for joining back after lunch. The topic of my presentation today is the content and format of an initial IND submission. So I've worked at the agency for over 20 years. I've seen a lot of IND submissions from individual investigators all the way through, pharmaceutical companies. So we get a variety of submissions in our group. This presentation will be more of your general, higher level overview. You could spend probably a couple of days talking about the content of each section of the IND. We have a lot of really great guidance documents that help people with those sections of the application. And in all honesty, before I put this presentation together, I went through our website. I've looked at a lot of the guidance documents. I've reviewed a lot of the information that's out there for you guys to utilize when you're putting together your initial IND submission. So I have a question to get us started, but also I think that'll be for voting for people online. But for people in the room, I think from the stats that were provided prior to this meeting, that I think about half of the people have actually submitted an IND to the agency. So maybe by show of hands, if people could tell me if you ever submitted an IND to the agency. Okay, and of those, who have submitted or maybe haven't submitted, how many people have taken advantage of the pre-IND meetings? Okay, very good. So again, I highly recommend taking advantage of some of the resources available to you on our website, and also, talking with the respective review divisions when you're putting together these applications, so that your application's as complete as possible and that you know what information needs to be in each one of the sections. Every division's unique and different and develops different drug products, and so some things that might be pertinent to one of those review groups and information that we would need in your submission might not be the same for another division. So early communication with us before you get to the stage of submitting your content or submitting your IND application would really be advantageous to you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So here's my disclaimer. Then we're going to do a poll question. And this is basically, I guess, for people online, although we can do a show of hands. And some people may remember, I didn't hear the earlier presentation, but you may already know the answer to the question from one of the previous speakers. But okay, is that voting? Okay. So for the people in the room, how many commercial and research INDs do you think CDER received in the 2016 calendar year? So by a show of hands, do people agree with the voting? Anybody disagree? Okay. Moving on. Looks like most people guessed the right answer. So 1,669 INDs, research and commercial, were submitted to the agency in 2016. I also provided at the bottom of the slide, you'll see the web address, the place where you can go and look for additional information. I'll be curious to see in 2017 how many INDs we had submitted, but you can go to the website and you can look at kind of the trends over time, which is actually kind of interesting to see. So. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Section 21 CFR 312.23, which is the IND format and content. So basically, by general overview, the sections in the next couple of slides are really just out of the CFR. They are the section headings that are required to be in IND submissions, with the exception of the cover letter. The cover letter I'll talk a little bit about in my presentation, but it's something that I highly recommend people provide to us, and you'll see why in the talk. The regulatory forms that you'll need to provide are the 1571, 1572, and your 3674. And I'll talk a little bit about these as we go along. Table of contents, introductory statement, general investigational plan, your investigational brochure, your clinical protocols, chemistry manufacturing information, pharma tox information. If you had any previous human experience with your drug, we'd want to know about that as well. And then any additional information that's going to be supportive for your application and relevant information if the drug's approved overseas and you have labeling or any foreign history on it, you're going to want to provide that to us as well. So moving forward, come May of 2018, all of the INDs submitted to the agency for commercial INDs are going to be required to be in electronic format. So probably a lot of you are already aware of that. And the formatting in the Common Technical Document is done by modules now. And so basically on the right-hand side of the screen, what you'll see is your original IND, and this is basically an outline of the components of an original IND. And it's kind of a busy slide, but it shows you now in the CTD format where the pieces from the original IND will now reside in the modules for the CTD formatting. So we'll go through this a little bit so you have a better understanding of it. And many of our guidance documents, what you'll see is what they call the CTD triangle, which kind of gives you an outline of where the modules actually fit for the CTD and what the content of each one of those modules is. The module that is at the top is Module 1, which is actually technically not part of the CTD. The CTD was created basically through a harmonization between the United States, Europe, and Japan to come up with a format. It's basically about the organization of the application so that everything was in a consistent place and followed the same hierarchy for submission, which is really helpful for us even on the receiving end, because we always know where to look for the information in from an IND to an IND. The information is going to be in the same place, so it's really helpful. But keep in mind that Module 1 is going to be a little different depending on where your application is submitted. And, of course, your content is going to be different depending on what type of drug you're developing. So I know that was a couple of busy slides, but here's another schematic which kind of shows you here's your IND items, and this is now where they fit in the CTD module. So I'm a visual person, and so I think the visuals are really helpful just to give you an idea of how it all plays out. So moving into the hierarchy of the CTD, and this will be, electronicized come May of 18, if it's not already, and I highly encourage you to start in advance and not wait till then to move your applications to the electronic format. You can see we have a very nice guidance document on the hierarchy, and it's quite lengthy, probably 30 plus pages, which gives you an idea of the different sections. I've just given you kind of a snapshot here, basically of the regional module 1 and then the summary section. So you can see it kind of skips numbers, so you have 1.1, 1.2, and then all of a sudden it skips from 1.4 to 1.12, and that doesn't mean those sections don't exist. It's just, for your initial IND, these are probably the more relevant sections that you're going to be looking for. And then it goes down to about 5 digits, 1.14, 0.4, 0.2 is where your investigational labeling will always be placed. So just to give you a little bit of flavor of what the CTD backbone looks like and how the index works, but, do go and look at those documents when you're putting together your IND. Now getting into the contents of the modules, the first one that we'll talk about is Module 1. Module 1 is basically all your administrative information. So what you'll expect to see in this part is your 1571, your cover letter, your reviewer's guide, clinical trial certification, which we'll talk a little bit about, any letters of authorization or references to other material that you want to use to support your application. If you have fast track or any other designations that you're requesting in your submission, let us know that as well. Any other correspondence, waivers, and then your investigational plan, which will go under the heading of your annual report, investigator brochure, and labeling. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these as we go through here. So the 1571 is really important. From the initial time that you submit your IND, and then every submission that comes into the agency after that will need to contain a 1571. It's basically a fill-in-the-blank type of form. It has check boxes on there. It provides, the contents of what you're submitting. You check the boxes to tell us what's in your submission. And then I'm going to go through some pieces of the 1571 that I think are key. But just know that, it provides us kind of with the high-level overview of the information in the submission, and it's utilized by us in the regulatory staff highly, and also by our document control room to make sure that your submissions get to the right review divisions and that the information that gets entered into our database is accurate. So it's really important that these be filled out as accurately as possible. It contains administrative information, sponsor's address, name, who the responsible agent is, all really important information for us to be able to get hold of you. Key information on the Form 1571, so of course the sponsor, really if you cannot abbreviate, spell out all the details, that would be really helpful. As far as if you had a pre-IND meeting with us and you have that IND number, please when you submit that in box number 6 to us. You would just drop the P and it would become your IND number. It's really helpful to make sure that your application gets to the right place in the most timely manner. Otherwise, if you didn't have a pre-IND and you didn't get one pre-assigned, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, certainly leave that blank and we'll assign one when your submission comes in. Let us know everything about your drug name. In the box below it, which is actually the indication, which is an extremely helpful field, and I'm sorry I didn't put that on here, but let us know what indication it is that you're seeking, because there can be many drugs that are developed for different indications, and we can't, by just a drug name, determine which review division an application might go to, so make sure that you provide us with that. I've seen submissions in our group where, anti-infectives, and sometimes I'll get an indication that just says bacterial infections, or it just says infections, or it'll say same as originally approved drug. Well, when the document control room gets this, it really doesn't mean anything to them, and so the more specific you can be, the better. As far as signatures on the form, we're going to need to have the authorized representative from the sponsor. In box number 17, it's usually the person that we're going to contact about the submission, and then if this person does not reside in the United States, we're going to need a counter signature, and that would go in box number 23, that information, and then it would be a dual sign off on the form. So we'll talk a little bit about the cover letter. Like I said, by regulation, the cover letter is actually not required, but it's highly recommended, especially it is in the backbone for the CTD. So it's usually a couple pages long, addressed to your division director. Submission identifiers, again, if you have your IND numbers or not, put that on there. Brief explanation of your study, what we're going to expect to find in your application, mode of action, title of your protocol, your product name, your indication. If you can highlight that at the top and let us know drug name or application number, that's really helpful to get it routed appropriately. The disease or condition that you're studying, manufacturer's information. If you had a pre-IND meeting with us, mention that to us. If there's specific request in your application, let us know that. The worst thing for us is to have an application in-house and then we find out on page 375 you had a request for something that nobody was really aware of. So specific request or anything that was requested in the pre-IND, let us know where you address those in the submission. That would be really helpful to know. For the reviewer's guide, it provides us with the types of submission that you would provide would be an outline for our reviewers. If there's things that you think would be helpful for them to know as they move through the application, please put that in the reviewer's guide. And mostly we see this for our commercial applications because they're quite large submissions. Talking a little bit about the 3674, and this was part of Title 8 of FDA. And it was it's now a requirement that registration and submission of your trial results be made to the clinicaltrials.gov database. Some of you may be familiar with that. So when you submit your IND to us, if you are submitting for a phase 2 or phase 3 study, we're going to expect to see this form completed in your NT and CT numbers, which are assigned by the clinicaltrials.gov folks on those forms and submitted. If you're submitting for a phase 1 protocol, it's likely that you're not going to have that because a phase 1 protocol isn't really required to have a 3670 with the number on it. However, there are boxes on the form that say you are aware of this regulatory requirement, and that when you have a study that falls under that, you'll be providing us with the form completed with the right box. I think it's box C. But before that, box A or B should be used appropriately. And then if it doesn't come in and there's no notation for it, when we send you your acknowledgement letter, we'll remind you of your requirement to comply with this certification. Other information in Module 1 is, again, we talked a little bit about pre-IND meetings, and if you're going to claim exemption for your environmental analysis or you want to provide us with information, this is where that would go. Other information we'd expect to see would be the investigational plan, investigator's brochure. Sometimes those are very small early on in development, especially at phase 1. And then, of course, your labeling for your product. It has to carry your caution statements about being an investigational drug, and this is where this information would be found. About your investigational plan, again, you'll hear throughout this presentation some of the information just seems like it repeats, and some of it does, and it's really a judgment to how much information you put in each section. So you'll probably hear me mention about dosing and duration, patient population, and indications a couple of times. But so briefly, in the investigational plan, this is where you would provide us with that high-level information about what your plans are for your study or trial duration, how many subjects you're going to enroll. A lot of times these are PK studies that might come in as your phase 1 studies. Very few patients. Phase 1 studies are really for safety. So if in your animal studies there was a toxicology risk that was identified, you're going to want to let us know that, or maybe there wasn't any risk identified. Let us know that too. Sometimes it's just as important to tell us what you don't know as it is to tell us what you do know. So just make sure, just fill in the blanks as you go along and let us know what information is available for us. For the investigator's brochure, again, it depends on what level of development you're at for your application. It could contain a lot of information or a little. Early on, it's going to contain information like the drug substance, the formula as you know it to that point, any information on animals. This is for your investigator to use as they're moving through the clinical study. Any pharmacokinetic information, biological disposition in the animals, and if known, any that you might be aware of in human studies, and any safety and effectiveness. Say the drug you're using has been used before, so you would want to let us know that. And then, a description of any of the possible risks or side effects might require us to have special monitoring that we'll expect to see. Maybe the drug causes high blood pressure in a lot of people, so you're going to have a lot of monitoring for blood pressure, or maybe it increases liver enzymes, so you're going to want to have a couple more blood draws. So just let us know how you're going to deal with those as special monitoring. So moving on to Module 2, which is all your summary information. And the summary information is basically broke out like this. It's introduction to the summary, your quality overall summary, the non-clinical overview, your clinical overview, and then it's going to also contain your non-clinical written and tabulated summaries and your clinical summary. So, this is really your summary section. So it can be quite lengthy if you have a lot of information, but again, it's supposed to be summary information. And then what you'll see is in your quality and your non-clinical and your clinical, which make up modules 3, 4, and 5, that's where the brunt of the information is going to be. So again, your introductory summary, we've talked a little bit about this. Some of it will be repeat, just general information about your active ingredients, the drug class, the structure of the product, the dosage form. Sometimes even at this stage, you're not exactly sure what your dosage form is. You might describe a couple of dosage forms because you're trying to determine which dosage form you're going to move forward with. What your clinical trial objectives are at this stage. What do you hope to accomplish? And again, any regulatory history or summary information from other sources. Go here. Quality overall summary would contain your information on your drug substance and your drug product. You'll tell us about the purity, how the purity of the product is being accounted for, what the strength of the product is, where your raw materials are coming from in a very summary format. Same with the non-clinical information. You're going to be providing us with the general testing that you've conducted, and you'll elaborate more on that when you get into your Module 4. Non-clinical written and tabulated summaries would also be here. Clinical overview, again, description of your plan, anything that's going to help us understand where you hope your development program go. Your clinical summary, any information that you have on biopharmaceutics studies, any of the analytical methods that you use, clinical pharmacology data, And if you do have it, efficacy and safety information, which I've mentioned already. Then moving into the quality section, we actually have a couple of talks at this meeting. You'll hear a lot on non-clinical, and you'll hear a lot on the quality section. So, I encourage you to attend those sessions where you'll learn really in depth what a lot of the information in these sections will be. So just at a higher level, chemistry information is going to be everything on the drug product, the drug substance, where it's coming from, your certificates of analysis. If you're including a placebo formulation, tell us what that placebo is made up of. This is the place you would put all this information. And then again, if you had any information from foreign sites, you can also include that here. And then I included a reference, and I've done that at the very end of the talk as well, where I found, in preparing for this talk, really helpful sites. So again, I've tabulated them all at the end for you, and this is one of them. But it does provide you with an awful lot of information on what needs to go in this section. Then moving on to Module 4, which is your non-clinical study reports. So go ahead and open all of these up. But adequate information about the drug's pharmacology and toxicology, and this information would come from your in vitro studies and also come from all of your animal studies. And then keep in mind, depending on the type of product you're developing, your animal studies might be different, different species, different type of testing. So, work with us on those in advance to make sure that all the testing that's required before you get to the stage of IND submission will be here. Any pharmacological effects or drug disposition, study reports that you have that tell us, say, where the drug might have been accumulated in animals, all going to be of a lot of value to us. And it's going to help us in determining whether or not the information that you provide in this section justifies moving into humans. So it's a real important section. Early in my career, I remember everything being in paper, and sometimes you would come in and there would be a new IND sitting there, and the whole hall would be lined with boxes. And most of the boxes you would get through, and probably out of 10 boxes, 9 boxes were the non-clinical data. So quite a lot of non-clinical data comes in with your initial IND submission, and that still holds true today. So we do like the electronic format. So as far as additional information, pharmacodynamics information, pharmacokinetic information, that's information on absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion, all from your animal studies. And again, what analytical methods did you use to evaluate that data? Maybe a little early, but you may have some validation information. Sometimes we see that a little bit later than the initial IND study. Toxicology. Toxicology is really important. So a summary of your toxicology information that you've accumulated to date. If you've done any of your acute or subacute tox studies, please provide that to us. Maybe you've done your carcinogenicity studies, depending on what your drug is and how much knowledge there is of it, or reprotox, any fetal effects that have been noted. And then did you do any special tox studies? Sometimes that's required by different modes of action of drugs, and then any literature references. So all helpful. Moving into the clinical study reports. Again, provide us with any information that you do have as far as clinical use of the drug. Sometimes at this point, obviously, you don't have any because this is going to be your first one into humans. And that's good. So submit to us what protocol you plan on opening your studies with. Is it phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3? The Form 1572 we'll talk a little bit about, investigator CVs, general information that you'll expect to see in the clinical section, any clinical study reports, and you also, some of this information might be a little bit of a repeat of what you provided in Module 2. So again, you'll see that current theme all the way through these different modules. So your components of your clinical protocol would be your phase of development. If you're in phase 1, you might provide us, it might not be a full protocol. It could be just the outline of your study with, all the key pieces outlined for us, numbers of subjects, duration of the study, the dosing, how'd you come up with the dosing, that type of information. qualifications of your investigators, and then you're going to identify for us your research facilities, what institutional review boards you're going to be using, and again, previous human experience, and ways that you're going to monitor for any risks. Your phase 1 study I talked briefly about. It's an outline of your investigation. Estimate for us your patient numbers. It's usually very small because these are safety studies. Your safety monitoring, what's built in, how you're going to monitor for safety. Is there any exclusions? Is there, there's certain population you're going to exclude for reasons of safety? Your dosing plan, your duration. And then moving on, a little bit more on the phase 2 and phase 3. These are really much bigger protocols, very detailed. Phase 2, obviously a little bit smaller than phase 3. The objectives, your purpose of your study. You're going to have your proposed dosing. It's going to be a determination of your patient numbers, may have been through some statistical analysis based on what the endpoint of your study is. And you're going to see a lot more patients enrolled in these studies. So you're going to have inclusion-exclusion criteria for screening. Your safety monitoring, you may have accumulated more information at this point. So if you open with the phase 1 study for your initial IND, then of course these phase 2 and phase 3 will come later. What are your stopping rules? If there's a safety signal, how is that going to be dealt with? And again, these are very well-designed studies. So your Form 1572 is your statement of investigator. It's going to be required that your investigators participating in the study sign this form, very much like the 1571. These are their commitments to conduct the study by the regulations. So very important to have these forms. It lets us know the clinical investigators' qualifications, and it provides us, by their signing these forms, of their agreements to conduct the protocol by regulation, to obtain the informed consent, that they are going to have an institutional review board and approval for their protocol. It also tells us that they're aware of what the record-keeping responsibilities are and how they're going to handle any adverse drug events, so that they are aware of what the reporting requirements are going to be for that, which is all very, very important when we're doing these clinical studies. The regulatory forms, sometimes they can be a little complicated, so I've provided some websites to help you out here. Again, take advantage of the information available on the web. The form, I provided the link to that. The instructions, I actually read all the instructions before coming in the meeting today. I think they're very, very helpful. It tells you, who signs what and what needs to go in each section. And then, really important is the frequently asked questions. So if you do have questions while you're going through them, through the form, look at this guidance document, because chances are somebody else had the same question and they've already addressed what the answer is. So take a look at that. I found that really, really helpful. And then previous human experience, I've touched on a little bit, but this in Module 5 is where this information would go. Letters of authorization, if there has been no previous human experience, again, certainly let us know that. And so this is kind of my general last slide about contents of an application that you would find when you look in the CFR, and they're listed there, 312.23A10 and A11. And depending on what type of drug you have, these may or may not apply. And where these go in the hierarchy of the submission, I advise you to go back and look at that hierarchy, because, it might go in a section that you actually wouldn't have thought it went into. So go back and look at that. If you have a radioactive drug, abuse potential drugs, we have a lot of publicity on those, or a lot of press on those right now. Previously submitted information, you're going to incorporate by reference. That's fine. Let me see if I can. Again, I do have my slide printed here. So again, this additional and relevant information, go back to the hierarchy and determine where it needs to go when you submit it within the index of the application. And then if you have any information that is in a foreign language, if you can please provide us with the document and also a translation of the document, that's always extremely helpful. Okay, so that's where we left off. So the next piece here is on the format of your application. Of course, up until May of 2018, if you're a commercial sponsor, you're going to have to move to electronic format. For those that are not commercial, paper submissions in the CTD format will still be acceptable. Electronic, use the CTD format, and I have a little bit of information on the electronic formatting on the next screen. Or following this screen. So for paper submissions, this would be the address that you would want to utilize, our Ammondale Road address. Then application resources. So these are the ones that I briefly mentioned that I've kind of pulled out as ones that I think would be valuable for you to take a look at. How drugs are developed and approved. Guidance. The guidance documents. We have a lot of guidance documents. As new ones come out and get replaced. Some are still in draft, but they're available. Please take a look at them and utilize them. Information on your chemistry, manufacturing, and control. Take a look at that, and you'll hear more about, like I mentioned earlier, from my colleagues later on today. And tomorrow, there's information on small business assistance for those of you who might need that. Investigator initiated. Over the years, it was really difficult for individual investigators to kind of parcel out what their responsibilities were for IND submissions. And so the agency has developed a website specifically for that. It's set up very well. I click on the links. I find it very, very helpful, even if you're doing a commercial IND. So take advantage of the information that's there. And then I've mentioned the hierarchy a number of times. Please take a look at the headings, the hierarchy that are available on this for the CTD. And it's updated periodically as new information or new regulations come into play for different pieces of submission that need to come into the agency. So do continually take a look at that so you make sure you know where your submissions go. Here's resources for electronic submissions. Take advantage of that. We have a technical address where you can email our technical group and send them any questions you have when you're putting your submission together. We also have an eSub team, which will help you with your electronic submissions. They also have a program where you can submit your like a test submission before your submission comes in. Please take advantage of that so that your submission doesn't get rejected when it gets submitted. If you've never utilized it and you're going to move forward with an IND application, I highly recommend getting an application number assigned prior to submitting it, especially coming in electronically. You're going to need that number. So here's the address for that, the CDER app number request. General information is needed on the drug, the sponsor, the indication in order to get that established. And then here's information on the electronic common technical document. And here's a survey. I guess
one more click.
Jeff wants people to fill out. So.
That was his
yeah, good. Yeah, wow. Okay, we'll do that again. So I do appreciate everybody's time. Please do the surveys. It helps Jeff and all of us out, as we prepare for future talks in hopes of benefiting you guys and getting solid applications into the agency with the information that we need. And, I did mention it early. Please take advantage of the resources available to you. Please talk with the review divisions. In your early stages of development, take advantage of the pre-IND meetings, even the written response only types of meetings, so that you make sure that when your application comes into us, that it's a really solid application, and hopefully it will be an application that you're allowed to start on your timeline for enrollment of human subjects into your studies. So again, I thank you very much for your time today, and I'll take a few questions, and then I'll be staying afterwards for additional questions as well. So.
All right, thank you, Maureen. Okay, in our schedule, we've still got about 3, maybe 4 minutes. As Maureen mentioned, she is going to be one of the presenters who's able to stick around. So those of you in the room who have questions can pose your questions to her then. Or if you really want to pose a question now, you can fight your way up to the microphone. But I'm going to give preference to the people online because we had a lot of online questions come in. Ray, could we have our first online question, please?
If the original IND application and all corresponding submission sequences are in paper format, do they all need to be converted into the eCTD format?
They will eventually have to be converted to eCTD format if they're a commercial IND. So what we've seen recently is that applications that are in paper will send us their first piece of correspondence, letting us know that from this point forward, they are going to be moving to electronic format. So I've seen that quite regularly, knowing that the deadline's coming up for the electronic submission. So a lot of people are taking advantage of switching now to the electronic format so that there's not this rush come May to make sure their submissions get accepted.
Okay, and Ray, either your voice has changed or I mistakenly should have said Kara. Kara, could you go ahead and read the next online question?
No problem. The next question is, what information is expected in a reviewer's guide document in Module 1?
In the reviewer's guide, it's information that would help the reviewer be able to work their way through the submission. So any type of information to guide a reviewer, regardless of which reviewer it might be, to get them through the submission.
Next.
Where do we find the requirements for clinical supply labeling?
I would say there's probably a guidance document on that, but I would have to take that offline and look. You know, the labeling requirements are usually in Section 201 of the CFR, and there are requirements for investigational labeling to carry specific wording on them, and probably in our chemistry manufacturing talk later on this afternoon, they'll be able to address exactly where that is located if they need more specifics.
All right, another one, please, Kara.
Is the May 2018 requirement for eCTD only for commercial INDs? What do we do if research-only IND moves to commercial?
So at any point, if it moves to commercial, it will have to be converted to electronic submission, is my understanding. So any commercial INDs, definitely by May 5th of 2018, need to be electronic. If it is not a commercial IND, then you're still able to submit in paper.
Okay, and we're going to wrap up with the last question here in the room.
Hi, for our literature references, are you accepting hard copies, PDFs of the references at this point, or links appropriate?
Either one is acceptable. I said more of our challenge with the references is people just outlining for us what all their references are. And then we have to go and search for them. So sometimes when you have key pieces, like additional references, it's fine, but anything that's really supportive of your application, you can provide it to us even in PDF, electronic hyperlink, whatever, is absolutely helpful, and it saves us an awful lot of time.
Thank you.
Okay, please help me thank Maureen for coming and talking to us this afternoon.